Stephen King's Pet Sematary, the book that ruined an entire generation's ability to spell cemetery. Pet Sematary is a fiction horror story published in 1983 and written by none other than Stephen King. Probably one of his five most famous books, which is saying a lot for an author as prolific as King. Uh, for those of you who don't know, Pet Sematary is the story of a young doctor who moves his wife and two children to rural Maine so that he can take a post as the head of the University of Maine's on campus medical facilities. He lives in a house outside of town, and in his backyard is a hiking trail that leads deep into the woods and ends at the Pet Sematary, which is a place where the local kids bury their deceased pets and, raise all sorts of, homemade monuments to their beloved pets. There's nothing sinister about the Pet Sematary, but sinister things lie far beyond the Pet Sematary, where none should venture, and our protagonist, of course, does venture, leading to the book's most iconic quote, which I believe was used in as the tagline for one of the movie adaptations: "Sometimes dead is better." I really enjoyed this book, at least at first. It was just such a page turner. I mean, King is famous all around the world for a reason. The man knows how to spin a yarn, and his prose is super fun and super quick. His characters are always like interesting and somewhere between. There's always something likable and something a little off-putting about some of them, and it's just great author, telling a fun and obviously original story. Themes. I recognize you may not go to Stephen King looking for, deep insights into the human condition or moral messages, but, every book has its themes, and I would say that, shockingly, this book is incredibly pro-family and specifically very pro-marriage. The protagonist's marriage is at the heart of this story, and then the secondary characters, which is their neighbors, their marriage is held up as being both very important and kind of a something worth emulating. So, I don't know, unexpected for a horror book, but I love it. And ironically, that is in the classic sense of a Greek tragedy, that asset, that pro-family thing becomes the fatal flaw, as our protagonist is willing to do anything for the sake of his family, and that limitless desire is ultimately, what leads to the tragedy at the end of the book. That desire to do anything to protect one's family. I absolutely demolished the first 2/3 of the book, and I was going around telling everyone like, "Hey, have you read King recently?" And they're like, "No," and I'm like, "You gotta read King. He's just so great. You forget how great he is because he's just such a cultural phenomenon. And lately, there's been something of a King renaissance where everything he's ever written is once again being adapted or readapted into a movie or a TV show or something." And because he's so ubiquitous, I think it's easy to kind of forget about him as an author and just like pick up one of his books, or at least it is for me, and for my circle of friends. Who King is. You're so familiar with his stories and everything, and maybe you just never get around to actually picking up some of those stories and reading them. And that's how Pet Sematary was for me. I feel like I've known about this book my whole entire life and never once picked it up. And I have a friend who's a horror fan, literary horror fan, as well as movies. But, I went to him. I was like, "Hey, if I want to read some King, what are your, biggest recommendations? I've already read The Shining, already read The Green Mile. What do you recommend?" And he sent me a list, and he mentioned, like, if you just want something short, Pet Sematary. And I was like, I did kind of want something short. King sometimes, like, it famously is over 1,000 pages. I did want something shorter, so I went, got myself a copy of Pet Sematary, and dived right in. And I was immediately just excited. Interesting world, interesting things happening right away. King's doing the classic like horror thriller thing of something's not quite right immediately. You're growing in suspicion about various things, and I was really just having a great time. So why do I keep hedging and saying the first 2/3? Honestly, the the end of the book for me, a bit it got a bit tedious because, and I noticed this in The Shining too, Stephen King has some of the most aggressive foreshadowing I've ever seen. Like, he's they're barely even hints. Like, at a certain point he's almost just telling you how the book's going to end, like what is going to happen. And you still have more than 100 pages left, and you already know like what the climax of the book is going to be. And for me it just takes a little of the wind out of my sails, because like that mystery, that what is going to happen, is part of what compels me forward. I learned after finishing the book that Stephen King doesn't like map out his stories. He just kind of starts writing, and the story, he has his characters, and the story takes him where it's going to take him, and the characters do what the characters are going to do. And maybe that's part of why he does have such rich and wonderful and believable characters. But also, maybe that's why the foreshadowing is so on the nose. Maybe it's because as he's writing, he's thinking of what's going to happen, and that slips into the writing as foreshadowing. I don't know, but look, I don't think it's a spoiler. If it is, I apologize. Obviously, the crux of Pet Sematary, again, spoiler warning, is that there are certain things you can do where the things that you bury will come back from the dead. And they come back not quite right. Hence the tagline, sometimes dead is better. So it's pretty clear, not that deep into, I mean, I'd say about 2/3 into the book, you know who's going to end up dying, that they're going to come back, and that after they come back, they're going to wreak some havoc, and they're going to cause some trouble. And you have a real good idea by the time you're approaching that final home stretch of like 100 pages at the end of the book. You know what's going to happen. Um, so for that reason, for me, for this type of book, that in my mind, while the characters are super fun, it's still a pretty plot driven story. Like, I'm really engaged in what's going on and what's going to happen. So once I know what's going to happen, I don't know. For me, at least, it bumped my rating a little further down than what it would have been if um, there hadn't been so much foreshadowing. Another interesting similarity with The Shining is that both Pet Sematary and The Shining feature a character going on a really long, really difficult cross country journey that proves to be absolutely, utterly futile, and almost comically so. I won't, if you've seen The Shining, I guess I'm accidentally spoiling Pet Sematary. If you haven't read or seen either, then just, I don't think that's giving much away to say there's a long journey that proves to be futile. So that's not a criticism. It's just a funny similarity, that almost to a T would happen twice. Long cross country journey, absolutely useless. I guess it is a criticism in this sense, considering I knew by that point what the ultimate ending was going to be. These, dozens and dozens and dozens of pages about this tedious journey, that then proved to be for nothing, kind of felt like, all right, I was already ready for the book to be over. So when you're already in that mindset and you follow this long journey and it's for absolutely nothing, you're like, I could have done without that. So who is this book for? Obviously, fans of horror. I think, if you're a fan of literary horror, Stephen King is absolutely required reading. And I think Pet Sematary is probably one of the required reading books in the Stephen King catalog, right up there with It and The Shining, um, and The Stand, probably, which I haven't read yet, but is high on my to be read list. If you're not a fan of horror, I don't know. It might be a little much. It's definitely scary. Lots of creepy things happen. Lots of disturbing imagery throughout the book, um, including a giant, ominous, and foreboding monster that ultimately isn't even relevant to the plot, but does a great job of just adding to the mystical and frightening aura of rural Maine. So for fans of horror, absolutely go for it. If you're interested, you want to try out some horror, I think, because this is a short book, it's a great read. It's incredibly well written. It's very representative of what literary horror has to offer. I think it's a great place to dip your toe in the water if you're curious. What would I rate it? I kind of waffled back and forth. Right when I finished it, I said 6 out of 10 because I was just so ready to be done reading it. Because, again, the foreshadowing, I was like, all right, I know what's going to happen. Let's just have it happen and let's be done with this. So, right when I finished it, I kind of had a bad taste in my mouth for that reason. But a little time has passed, and now I'd say 7 out of 10. It's really well written. It's really fun. It's a great story with great characters. So 7 out of 10. Final thing to review: cover art. What I have here is the 2018 paperback copy, and there's the cover. Not for me. Not. I don't like the use of like an actual cat and an actual cemetery on the cover. I don't know if these are images from one of the various movie adaptations. I think there was an adaptation that came out in 2019. This came out in 2018. I don't know if it was a tie-in at all or part of a marketing push. But yeah, for me, I'd rather have this be like a drawing, an artistic rendering of a cat and a cemetery rather than an actual photo of just a house cat combined with an actual cemetery. So yeah, Pet Cemetery. If you've read it, let me know what you think of it. If you also have noticed Stephen King's tendency to really heavily foreshadow his endings, I'd love to hear that. Or if you think that I'm an idiot for thinking that he's heavy handed with his foreshadowing, I'd also like to hear that. So if you like the video, throw it a like since the AI decides what we all watch, but we do at least get a vote.